We're pleased this afternoon, almost this afternoon, to have our next panel, names which most of you may recognize from their decades of contributing to technical and adaptive change in student support in California. I'm going to introduce Lisa Eisenberg, who can introduce us to the rest of her panel, esteemed panel members. Lisa is the Child and Youth Health Financing Project Director at WestEd. And prior to joining WestEd, she worked for 9 years with the California School-Based Health Alliance, most recently as the Director of Policy and External Affairs. So Lisa's going to introduce us to Scott, Marni, and Jonathan, and hear the wisdom around blending dollars.
Great. Thank you for having me. From data analysis to financing, we're just going to nerd out this morning. We're just going to be like super nerdy, which is my vibe. So come with us. Thank you for having us. We're excited to talk about financing. This is our integrated funding panel, strategies for sustaining new investments in student health. I'm Lisa Eisenberg with WestEd, and I'm joined by Jonathan Barnett Tugbenyoh, who is the Director of School Partnerships for Seneca Family of Agencies. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with a team of 20 plus therapists, behavioral aides, and school climate specialists, serving elementary and middle schools across San Francisco and the peninsula. We also have Marni Sandoval, who is a licensed psychologist and Deputy Director of Child and Youth Services for Monterey County Behavioral Health Bureau. Currently, Marni provides oversight and management for the vast array of child and youth mental health programs provided through Monterey County Behavioral Health. And then last but certainly not least, we have Scott Ostendorf, who is a project manager for the Student Behavioral Health Incentive Program with Marin County Office of Education. Scott supports school districts in Marin County with structuring school-based mental health services, expanding the behavioral health workforce, and developing sustainable funding systems through the Child and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. So I have a couple of questions I'm going to turn over to our panel. Before we do that, I wanted to set the stage just a little bit about integrated funding. I always get a little nervous when I start talking about the financing piece because oftentimes when we start talking about the specifics about this financing can be used for X, Y, and Z, this financing can be used for A, B, and C, we lose the conversation that we've been having all the last 2 days around staying family and student-centered and focusing on our relationships across agencies and across departments. So we're going to try to hold that in your heart as we're talking about dollars, as we're talking about funding streams. Give us some grace as we start talking about the specifics of financing and what it looks like. So on your screen is a quote from the Ecosystem Working Paper, which is, "State and local leaders must thoughtfully and collectively weave together this abundance of resources in order to sustainably support programs and services so families can get what they need when they need it." So I think that I want us to hold that a little bit through this panel conversation. And understand that this financing stuff should be happening in the background. We should be centering our students and families. We should be centering the services they want, and how you shift dollars should happen in the background. It should be focused on what our parents and students are telling us, but then it's the job of the nerds, the finance folks, the analysts in the background to figure out how to make that happen with the available funding. So I think when we talk about integrated funding, we often talk about blending and braiding. How you pull a bunch of funding sources into one pot, mix it all together, and everybody takes what they need. Braiding is the funding sources stay separate, but they sort of weave together in a way that makes a comprehensive system. And I intentionally added partnering up here because I think oftentimes when we think about integrated funding, we're thinking about our own program or agency's budget. And we're thinking about how we can pull all of these funding sources into our own budget to sustain the services that we want to spend dollars on. And so I put partnering up here too because I want to challenge us, and I think we're already doing that, but challenge us to think about our systems budget. Not just our agency or our program's budget, but how are we blending and braiding resources through partnering so that our funding goes into somebody else's budget, some of their funding might come into our budget, so that we're creating a blended or braided funding system for the entire system, not just our program. And then a last slide for me before we get to the people that are much smarter than I am. I want to offer these kind of ways of thinking about integrated funding, because integrated funding can look like a lot of different things. So the first one is integrated funding as a match. So this is how Medicaid works. State or locals have to put up some dollar amount that gets matched with federal dollars that can be spent on Medi-Cal services. This is how the LEA Medi-Cal billing option program works. LEAs have to, schools, local education agencies have to use their dollars, and then they match what is an eligible expenditure with Medicaid. So that's what I mean by a match. You can also have integrated funding as supplement. So this is where you figure out what you can spend on, usually using your restrictive funding sources like Medi-Cal billing, and then you fill in the gaps with usually more flexible dollars. So you identify, well, this is the A, B, and C things that I know our students and families need that I can bill for. But what else am I missing in the system, and what do I have to fill in the gaps with more flexible funding sources? The third one is integrated funding as leverage. This is a little bit similar to supplement, but bear with me a little bit as I explain it. So this is where you work with your partners, where each partner contributes a distinct set of services that are funded with separate dollars to create a comprehensive school health system. So you all are contributing your dollars into this puzzle piece, which is the same graphic as the supplement, which is why, just bear with me. So an example of that is an LEA investing in a community schools manager to connect students and services provided by community partners. So that's everyone's kind of bringing in a separate brick to this structure. And then the last one is maximize, where you invest funds to increase revenue from other services, typically billing, but it can look like other things. So this can be if you're using grant funds to improve coordination or to invest in your cost team so that you can increase referrals to your partners or to the services that you can bill for. This can also be like, sometimes we see this in student outreach. You invest in your peer-to-peer programs using flexible dollars, and that decreases the stigma around your behavioral health services that are on campus or your physical health services on campus, and it increases access to some services that you can bill for. I see some nods, some totally confused. And I want to end, none of this is mutually exclusive. So you're not just picking one integrated, all these systems are usually doing all of these together. I just think sometimes it's helpful to provide a little bit more specificity into what we're talking about braiding or blending as these sort of examples. So I know that was quick. We only have like 30 more minutes for this panel to do answer all the financing questions that exist out there right now. So I'm going to turn it to my panelists with a first question to kind of orient us to some more examples. So what are examples of integrated funding you've seen in your work, either in the past or currently? So Marni, why don't we start with you and then head down the panel that way?
Oh, all right, there we go. So I guess we're at good afternoon at this point in our third day. Just a brief moment to just say how amazing have these 2.5 days been, right? Thank you, Elizabeth and the whole Breaking Barriers team. Really incredible. So I want to start by sharing that I've been in public mental health for over 25 years and have started that journey even in graduate school, like unknowingly, just being drawn to public mental health and underserved populations, and have worked within settings in the juvenile justice and juvenile probation, within institutions and outpatient settings, within schools, in partnership with child welfare, and did that early in my career, embedded in those systems with partners. And my naivete, I think, led me to just walk forward and connect with people and build the relationships from an unassuming place. And as, you know, I gained a little bit more experience, I continued to be hopeful that that's the way we needed to do things. And so in Monterey County, I've been there for 23 years, and we started that journey with our Office of Education over 30 years ago. And so I want to try to take this financing stuff and make it interesting enough that we don't geek out too much on the numbers and the calculations. But I talked to you about how we tried to get creative with funding in our Monterey County in partnership with our Office of Ed and our districts. So a little bit about our landscape, a medium-sized county. We've got about approximately 437,000 residents. One Office of Education, one SELPA, 24 districts, 126 public school sites, and 8 charter schools. There's approximately 78,000 enrolled students in public education in Monterey County, and over 80% of those students are Latino or Hispanic. So just a little bit of the landscape that we're working in. So that collaborative partnership with the Office of Education, again, started over 30 years ago to really help provide some services in the special education space. And those strong partnerships continued. And in 2011, when the AB 3632 funding kind of went away, which was a very sad moment in some ways, and it kind of transferred that responsibility for mental health services back to education departments from child welfare and behavioral health, many county behavioral health departments stepped away from what had been happening in partnership with offices of education and their SELPAs. We didn't do that. We maintained our relationship, and we actually grew it stronger. We developed a very comprehensive MOU with our Office of Education and with our SELPA, and continue to really provide those special education services for mental health in every single school in the entire district. So remember, that's 126 schools. So it was a big lift, but we were committed to it. And then we decided we needed to figure out how to actually serve more students better. And we found PBIS, and notice I say we. It's because all of this was done in the confines of that relationship with our Office of Education from the beginning. And when we discovered PBIS, it was a transformative moment for us collectively. And so we really continued to leverage, so here's the financing piece. The way we were doing this is that behavioral health was leveraging Medi-Cal specialty mental health dollars for any Medi-Cal enrolled student beneficiary that we could. And our SELPA was using their special education funds as our local match dollars. Then we started to pull in some Mental Health Service Act dollars when we wanted to expand with PBIS. So our Office of Ed applied for a school climate transformation grant, and they did receive that. Behavioral health chipped in another 120 grand from MHSA dollars to help expand the expansion of that PBIS into districts in our traditionally and historically underserved region of the county. So we were tackling 72 campuses at trying to implement PBIS in partnership. So the funding really helped us to take this into our general education space and get out of just the special education space. So that was very exciting for us. And then 2014 to 2016, a lot happened for us. Dr. Lucille Eber came out. Those of you in education may know who she is. She came out to Monterey County and really trained us on PBIS. We also pulled in some more SAMHSA dollars, block grant dollars, to help build up youth mental health first aid and bring in additional training around the interconnected systems framework. So by 2014, we had, behavioral health had MOUs not only with SELPA and our Office of Education, but we had entered into MOUs with specific districts to provide general education services. And we were doing that in a very interesting financing way. So what we were doing, we were providing supports at all 3 tiers. So we basically took our services and tried to align them with the 3 tiers that our education partners are working and operating within. And so the districts were using their LCFF funds to help provide for the services. We were using special education funds and specialty mental health service dollars. So what we did in behavioral health is we calculated with our smart finance people. I was not one of those. But they figured out a flat rate for what it costs for a clinician or a mental health social worker's time to be on campus. And that included both their salary and benefits as well as our administrative costs. And then participating school districts were expected to contribute a percentage of that rate based on their percentage of Medi-Cal enrollees in the district. And that helped us have more equity across the county. So, the more Medi-Cal enrollees you had in the schools, we were going to leverage more Medi-Cal dollars. So, of course, that percentage varied. And this approach really allowed our clinicians to serve every student on campus, not just Medi-Cal beneficiaries, but every single student. We also leveraged our MHSA prevention and early intervention funds so that our clinicians were also, and our social workers were also able to provide non-billable services. So they were really in that prevention and early intervention space, doing some of the work that the wellness coaches that you heard about earlier, that kind of work happening on campuses. And we really transitioned the model so that the clinicians and social workers were on the same campuses all day, every day, and became part of the school climate and the school culture. Yeah, they were part of the school community. The kids got to know them, the staff got to know them, the administration got to know them. They were part of the school community. And so it really changed the way that mental health started to be thought about and looked at on school campuses in our county. So it's been pretty great. The last thing I'll share about that before I make sure you have time for the two of you to answer this question is that in 2020, we decided our work was still far from being done. We had a flavor of the interconnected systems framework, and we wanted to push it farther into all of the schools. Really, that's the integration of mental health into the framework in schools, so taking MTSS and including mental health. So we applied for the Mental Health Student Services Act grant dollars that was available, and we did that application with behavioral health being the lead, but we did it in partnership with our County Office of Education, and we got that award in July of 2021 for 4 years. We were awarded $3.9 million, and the intention of our work under that grant is to expand ISF into the districts throughout our entire county. And it was very exciting, and it's a different project. Many counties are using that funding to grow behavioral health services, but we decided we needed to make sure that behavioral health was a core part of every district before we grew the workforce, which that's another challenge for another conversation. So scaling up ISF, and the funding was used in a multitude of ways. We funded some positions in the Office of Ed. We partnered our behavioral health leadership team with the Office of Ed team to go out and become strategic partners for each of the districts in implementing ISF. So there's a lot involved with that. But really using that money in that way has helped us to push that implementation. We're in beginning of year 3 with that grant funding right now, so seeing some positive stuff. Our gen ed education partnerships have varied across districts, so the last thing I'll share is that it does look different from district to district because, each school community has its own unique set of needs. And so in some of the schools, behavioral health is providing all of the school-based mental health services for all tiers. In some districts, the district has their own mental health staff that will provide supports and services for Tier 1 and Tier 2, but they've contracted with behavioral health to provide those Tier 3 services so that the system of care is still integrated into what's happening on school campuses. And all along the way, behavioral health has continued to leverage our PEI dollars to provide training and consultation to the educators, to the school staff, to parents, and to kids. So again, just blending all of that money in a way that we have what feels like and is experienced as a continuum of care for the kids and the educators and their families on those school campuses.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm like sandwiched in between so much expertise. It's a good thing you're both therapists. I feel really held emotionally. I'm Jonathan. I'm with Seneca. You heard from our amazing founder, Ken Barrick, earlier today. As like the CBO guy, thought like just talk about a kid. I get to support our San Francisco partnerships, which like Scott is like the Brad Pitt of SFUSD mental health. So I feel real nervous right now. I feel like it's warm. Maybe it's warm. Anyway, just to talk about one kid, I'm really bad with pseudonyms, so I thought I would just call him Pseudo, and that's a free baby name if anyone's pregnant. But just like credit me at the middle name if you can. Pseudo is from the Hunters Point neighborhood. Is anyone familiar with Hunters Point in San Francisco? So, amazing community activists and a history of strong community organizing. The streets are named after African American female leaders, and of course, also a history of systemic oppression. And we see the fallout of that in our students every day. And so Pseudo, we met him in 3rd grade. He was an internalizer, some of that like elopement, but not the kind where you get a ring, like the sad kind. And just withdrawal on the playground. And it might have gone unnoticed, but we have a school climate specialist funded through a grant who rolled out a social emotional screener. And so Pseudo's teacher marked that she was observing these traits in Pseudo. He then received either a social skills group or a check and check out. I actually can't remember which one, but a tier 2 intervention that was connected to the strong PBIS and SEL systems that our specialist was working on with the climate team. Pseudo then unfortunately lost his dad last spring, which of course sent him through a really tough time, and we started to see more externalizing behaviors. And he became kind of like a shadow in the classroom and was absent more than he was present. But then we have a team of amazing tier 3 providers funded through our Medi-Cal partnership that's also at the site. There's the braiding. See, like I'm a girl dad, so I just found out what braiding means. It's like they're supposed to say separate, which is probably where I'm going wrong with the hair, not the funding. So anyway, we're now able to make this seamless transition to him receiving these tier 3 embedded services. I love that you were talking about like providers really being embedded in a school campus. We found that to be so important because before Pseudo was even identified as needing these services, he already knew our bachelor's level behavioral staff. He already knew our clinician, and he knew our specialists, and his family did as well. And so that transition was so much more seamless for him. And now, in addition to getting therapeutic touch points probably every day, if I'm honest, which it right now is needed, and push-in supports from our non-master's behavioral specialist who's in his classroom more often than not. His teacher is also getting 6-week coaching cycles from our school climate specialist, again, to connect her back down to those PBIS and SEL systems that this team, over our 3-year grant, has spent the first years really perfecting. And so for her to get that specialized support, this is how you do our PBIS system, but this is how you do it specifically for Pseudo as well, to support his services that he was receiving at the tier 3 level. So I'm going to stop there and pass to Scott. But thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really happy to be here with you all today, and thank you all for making it this far. I said to somebody this morning, I really just want to go home, but I'll stick it out. And I just think it's really interesting that there are 3 therapists on this panel talking about finance. So that tells you that we don't have to be finance experts to talk about money, and it doesn't mean that we have to be experts in this.
Right.
We just need curiosity and we need passion.
Right.
So I'm here as a representative from the Marin County Office of Education. I am the SBHIP project manager. I'm actually very new to Marin County. I've only been in my position 6 months, so I've had to do a fast learn on all things Marin County. Prior to joining the county office, though, I worked for 20 years in San Francisco Unified School District. I don't see any San Francisco people here today. Some former San Francisco colleagues, however. Where I worked as essentially a school social worker. I was a clinical supervisor in a graduate training program, became a school psychologist, and then was pulled from the field during the transition from AB 3632 to AB 114, helping the district to navigate that transition. I later became a special education supervisor, supervising school psychologist, and am now here. So I'm in Marin County. Those of you who don't know where Marin County is, we're located just north of San Francisco. So essentially, once you cross the Golden Gate Bridge and you go up to Sonoma County, all of that is Marin County. There are large pockets that are very rural. Most of the population is around that, right around the 101 freeway. Our county office is relatively small. I think we have about 80 employees, and we serve 17 school districts, some of which are very small. I believe our smallest school district has 20 students. And our two largest districts cover about 15,000 students. So we have about 30,000 students in public ed, 15,000 within two districts. 1/3 of our students, so with 30,000 students, only 1/3 of those students qualify for Medi-Cal. So we're pretty low Medi-Cal percentage, 2/3 having commercial insurance. So we're definitely keeping our eyes on the fee schedule and the opportunities that might come there. So when I think about integrating funding sources, within Marin County, we have a very deep relationship with county behavioral health as well. So we are the beneficiaries of the Mental Health Student Services Act, as Marni mentioned as well. We got quite a bit less money than Monterey County, $2 million, but that has served to start up wellness centers at our two largest districts in their high schools. The wellness center movement in Marin County came quite a few years later than I think it did in many other districts. So we've been able to partially fund, it's not fully funding those wellness centers, but it does partially fund them, supplemented with other district funds. We're also partially funding our Student Wellness Ambassador program, which we call SWAP. And SWAP is an amazing program in which we embed staff in the high schools and middle schools to help students become ambassadors for wellness with their peers. We had an amazing event at one of our high schools a couple weekends ago where we had 75 students show up for the retreat. It was a really, really beautiful event. Another form of integration is, as Marni mentioned, the Mental Health Services Act, usually primarily through the prevention and early intervention portion of that. That is allowing our county to place county behavioral health providers in schools, as well as funnel some of that money to some districts that wanted to hire directly themselves. We do have, I would say, a really beautiful relationship with our behavioral health partners, but I don't see how that relationship has yet integrated itself enough to seeing dollars exchanged. So I don't see EPSDT contracts going to a large number of community agencies, and so districts are funding those services directly to the CBOs, and so we're expanding that and looking at how we can pull in some Medi-Cal dollars through LEA BOP. I'm overseeing the SBHIP project with Marin County. We applied for 2 interventions. The first was to develop an LEA Medi-Cal billing consortium. Many of the districts in Marin County had experience with LEA Medi-Cal billing, but they bowed out over the years. Just due to administrative difficulties, how burdensome it was at that time. And we saw this as an opportunity to create centralized knowledge and expertise at the county office level, and then to pull in districts that were interested. So we're doing a consortium with 4 districts. 2 are very small, 2 are relatively large. And so I'm very excited about this. We have signed a contract with a new billing platform vendor. And the MOU is going out tomorrow, finally, to get signed. And, we're moving forward with this. When I like to tell this story that when I interviewed for the position and I met with the county superintendent of schools, he's like, well, what do you want? Why are you so passionate about this Medi-Cal thing? And I said, we cannot leave a dime on the dollar on the table. It's not because we're greedy, it's because the kids deserve it, And so I'm really passionate about that. Even though we're only 1/3 Medi-Cal, we have some pockets of in our district that really, really would benefit, and we can pull in those dollars if we really develop the expertise, create the training and the support that the end users need, that the staff need at the schools. So I'm very passionate about that. Very excited also about we've applied for some of the early intervention grants under the Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practices. We submitted an application 2 weeks ago for about $650,000 to fund CBITS, Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools, middle school intervention for group counseling around trauma. And the beautiful thing is that we're going to scale that for Medi-Cal billing as well during the implementation of that. I think I'll leave it at that. I was going to talk a little bit about my work in San Francisco. It mirrors very much what Marni said around that transition from AB 3632. I just would stress the partnering is so critical, and having those relationships and knowing who to call, who to talk to, and how can we just put all of our creative minds together to support students.
Not that you can't applaud each panelist, but we're going to run out of time. So I hope as you were listening, you were hearing like, oh, that's an example of match. Oh, that's an example of maximizing. Oh, interesting. That's an example of filling in the gaps and leveraging. So second question, a number of you mentioned using one-time funding or grant dollars. So Marni, you mentioned using MHSSA to invest in the interconnected systems framework through your schools. Jonathan, you mentioned a grant, but I don't know what the source was for PBIS implementation that supports your connection to clinicians at your school sites. And then Scott, you mentioned also the MHSSA dollars to invest in wellness centers, student wellness ambassador programs. So those are some examples of school-based health services that you're building up with one-time funding. And the question is, how are you and your partners thinking about sustaining those services after that grant ends or that one-time funding ends? So why don't we start with Scott and go back the other way?
That's an excellent question. I think that we realize that we are not going to maintain the level of services that we currently have simply through billing. So we've got to explore other opportunities for that. But because we are reinitiating LEA Medi-Cal billing, that's going to be our first priority. Also looking to see how we can start to bill for general ed services through the LEA BOP. Are there any districts in here who are billing general ed services outside of vision and hearing screenings? Okay, I see one out in the hallway. Okay. So I think that speaks to it, just some of the challenges about how do we expand these opportunities. You know, with billing for special ed services, it's quite easy. We've been doing it for many years, but you know, there's a care plan, there's an IEP, but when you go into gen ed, it looks a little bit different. And so we're looking to how to explore that. We did not apply to be one of the early adopters for the fee schedule. We didn't feel like we were ready for that, but that's certainly something that we're looking at in the next couple of years.
So we started our crop of school climate specialists, which was like our community schools manager role, back under the Investing in Innovations grant under the Obama administration, which I feel like then we've just been chasing the next grant opportunity ever since. And so I didn't even realize that until you sent this question. I was like, oh, we just are grant chasers. That's what we've been doing, which is both exciting and also exhausting. And so we've gone from I3 to then looking at philanthropic funders and getting like some district matching along with and this is for the tier 1 and tier 2. I think as a CBO that's been doing, Ken, how long have we been doing Medi-Cal billing? A long time, and so I think that piece we feel comfortable with, but it's finding the funding for those tier 1 and tier 2 services that keep us like always looking for the next opportunity, and just like who is that girl in the grant world? And right now she's CCSPP, so like thank you, we're there, we're with her, we're hanging out. But then looking to like what's going to be next. And I know in San Francisco we have like the Student Success Fund that's going to be rolling out. And then I think all eyes, of course, are on this multi-payer fee schedule, which to me still feels like the next Avengers movie. We're like, I know it's coming. I'm excited. I'm also really confused. But I think, and just looking at it and knowing that there really isn't anything that looks like a community schools manager or a climate specialist on there, at least that I can figure out through that language. And so I think what we're hoping is that more roles that schools are dishing out money for already, like school social workers or therapists they might be paying for directly, could then be covered through the fee schedule. And then that might free up funds for something like a community schools manager or a school climate specialist. So wishful thinking. I'm going to pass.
So the question of how to do this after these one-time funds dry up has been something that, at least in our county, we've been talking about since the one-time funding appeared on the scene, because we knew it was going to come to an end and we didn't want things to just dry up and have to go away. So we've been talking with our education partners from the beginning about how you really have to take a deep breath and jump into this space of actually leveraging the various Medi-Cal sources that are going to be and have been available to our schools. The MAW billing, the billing options program, and this multi-payer fee schedule that's coming. They really have to not be so scared about it. We're there. We can support you, talk with you. We can bring in any technical assistance that's needed, but you're going to have to do that in order to sustain much of it. Of course, we'll continue to leverage our specialty mental health billing as much as possible in partnership with the LCFFF funding from the schools so that we have those local match dollars. Within our MHSA plan, we have a very specific carved out program for school-based mental health. As long as we can, and we'll see what happens in March, as long as we can, we'll continue to leverage that to cover those non-direct services for all kinds of prevention activities, for supports, consultation for the teachers. We also use that money to cover the month of July for mental health services when our schools are closed. Our kids still need the mental health care, so behavioral health funds that 100% during the month of July using that money. And then I would say lastly, we want to make sure that collectively we're growing partnerships with CBOs and nonprofits to bring in many prevention and early intervention services because they can leverage philanthropic dollars and all kinds of things that in the public space are a little harder to do, but we could leverage that money if we have adequate partnerships with that array of providers too.
Great. Has anybody watched the Loki series? I feel like the multi-payer fee schedule is like, what's going on? What is this? Nerd alert. Okay, last question. So no surprise, the multi-payer fee schedule is mentioned a number of times on this panel. So it's launching in January 2024 with cohort 1. Will be available for all schools and school-linked providers in January 2025. So panelists, many of you are looking at this as an opportunity to help sustain school-based behavioral health services. My question is, what challenges and or questions do you think schools and their school-linked providers should be considering and or asking as they are anticipating this fee schedule? Let's mix it up. Jonathan, Marni, Scott.
Cool. Okay, so I think one of the scariest things is that we don't know what the reimbursement rates are going to look like yet. And so I think the fear is that it's not going to cover what we know it really takes to do this work in schools, have it in a highly coordinated, well-integrated way. And so I think we are going to need to work with schools in creative ways to supplement those costs. Also, like, who is going to bill the third-party administrator? Is it going to be districts? What is this going to look like for smaller districts? I think that's something we think about too. And the bigger districts might have the infrastructure to figure that out. And for smaller districts, it might be more challenging. And you could probably speak more to that, Scott. And then also, like, how are providers going to be reimbursed? And just thinking about particularly smaller providers, that it might be tough if you're operating with a limited cash flow while waiting for 6 months to a year for reimbursements. I think those are some of the things that we're thinking about. And I don't even know.
Marni. Yeah, sorry, Marni.
It's all good. So aside from what we don't know, right? We don't know what we don't know yet. So we'll just have to wait and see how that rolls out. The kinds of things that we have been talking with our education partners about is being really mindful of multiple things, including confidentiality. That's very different in the mental health space than it is in the education space. And I mean, there's the technical components that I think Elizabeth's going to talk a little bit about in her session coming up. But there's also the whole concept around mental health being a safe and protected space. And so helping our educators really understand that difference. Equitable access to the mental health care and reducing stigma in many school communities. Despite some well-intentioned school staff, there is stigma around mental health. The kids feel it on campus. Oh, that one goes to the therapist's office, right? So how do we really help our school communities reduce that stigma around mental health? The documentation, the compliance, the timeliness required with Medi-Cal billing, the quality assurance components of that once you get into Medi-Cal billing. And like Jonathan was saying, the direct service levels that are going to be required to support fiscal sustainability. I mean, that's going to be a really big one. And lastly, I would just say engagement, partnership, and collaboration with the county behavioral health departments is really going to be critical, because this fee schedule is bringing a lot, but it's going to require all of us to actually even attempt to meet the need. So it really is our time to truly break down the silos and build up a structure where we have a really integrated ecosystem of care for our kids. So.
Thank you both. I think what I'm looking for are more examples. I think Sean Powell's example, her case study that she presented the other day, was the first time that I really got to see how this can all fold together and be implemented. I think, in the absence of information and specific concrete information, I know I tend to go pessimistic and question and doubtful. And so I think that, for me, it's going to be an attitude, a change in attitude about really trying to see this as an opportunity to be innovative and creative. But this is going to be a huge culture shock, I think, in school districts. Given the fee schedule is not going to include special ed mental health services, it's going to be general ed mental health services. Nobody raised their hand here except for one lone soul in the back that is billing general ed mental health under the LA-BOP program, although that's been an option for the last couple of years. So I think this culture shift is going to be really hard on our school staff. And how do we help them understand? What I say to people is, who doesn't have a problem with billing? Lawyers, right? So we've got to be a little, not all lawyers. Okay, some of them maybe get reminders and things like that. So, I mean, part of it, I think, is what I've done as an administrator previously is really working with the staff to understand the real life example. Like 3 of your positions are funded out of this. Do you know that? That's why you do that tracking. That's why you do that billing. That's why we run a report every month. That's why you get an email from me when you're behind. That's why I make time in the staff meeting asynchronously for you to do data so that you can do that at that time so you're not doing it at night. I know I'm off topic here a little bit. But I think that it's an incredible opportunity, but those of us who work in schools, we didn't come to work in schools because we wanted to make money necessarily, and we certainly didn't think we would be responsible for generating revenue. But what I always say to staff is, you're already doing the work. Now it's time to get credit for that.
All right. Thank you so much to my panelists. I hope you can join me in a round of applause. I want to really quickly end with 3 thoughts to leave you on, which I think came up in the answer to the last question is why is integrated funding so important? 1, it's a strategy to sustain those one-time investments that we've all been we've used one source of grant dollars to build this whole program. And when those grant dollars go away, we got to pull from multiple sources to sustain that work beyond that end point. I also think integrated funding is student and family centered. If we create a system that's not driven by just one funding source, that means we can adapt and meet the whole needs of children, youth, and families in our school settings. And then I think the last thing, which I think Scott mentioned, is if we can integrate funding sources and leverage our flexible dollars as well as our billing, that means we're not over-relying on billing to sustain our services. No one funding source is going to sustain this whole system. So we're going to have to knit together to supplement what we are billing for to provide that teacher training so that the teacher can identify JJ in Sean's example to refer JJ to the cost team. We have to supplement with funding for peer-to-peer support so that our students are reducing the stigma of accessing that billable service on that school campus. So that is our panel on financing. These are our email addresses if you would like to reach out to anybody up here. And again, I hope you'll join me one more time in thanking our panelists.